Hi Jason, lovely to meet up with you and do some further work on your game. Obviously the key focus point during this session was your approach wedge play. We started off with 60 yards and then started working more towards 90, 100, talking about the variables involved. These particular pieces of footage relate to the 60-yard shot that we were hitting to the white flag out of the range. And we talked about a number of things. The main concern I had at the start was the width of stance didn't vary relative to the length of shot, which is something you need to consider. So when we stand wider, we can engage the bigger muscles, create a bigger arc, etc. By narrowing the stance, we start to reduce the effects that these bigger muscles have. The sequencing in the downswing starts to change slightly, so we're taking a little bit of power out the shot. Once we get to a point on the course where we can't hit a full shot, the main goal is obviously controlling ball speed. Number of ways we can do that, which we discussed during the session, and I'll send you across the image that we looked at where the variables were sort of listed. We went through them and explained how they sort of bleed into one another. Anyway, so narrowing the stance relative to the shot was the first variable we discussed. We then talked about the lean of the shaft at impact. So leaning the shaft forward at impact as much as you do. So it's quite a substantial difference between where it starts and where it finishes. And the shaft lean at setup initially is probably about maybe 5 degrees. There's a push forward to start the swing, which is fine, and then as we come into impact, that shaft's leaning forward 17, 18 degrees. So most of the wedge shots you were hitting at this point involved you de-lofting the golf club, adding quite a lot of shaft lean, which is fine providing we're trying to play a certain type of shot. One of the issues with that is that as we lean the shaft forward, we're de-lofting the golf club, but we're also going to hit higher up on the club face, so the ball is going to tend to come off a little bit faster, so the smash factor number increases on the monitor, but mainly the ball speed. If you can control your ball speed, you can control the distance you hit the golf ball. So what we want to do is try and, with yourself at least, try and reduce that ball speed. First couple of shots that you tried to hit 60 yards for me carried about 80, so there's definitely a tendency to be a little bit heavy-handed with the wedge shots. Once you hit a couple of those, you'll tend to start to decelerate a little bit, which again was evident in your session, and that can lead to further problems. So we then touched on maybe changing your approach to these wedge shots, and rather than trying to continuously take loft off the golf club, start to play these shots with a golf club that had a little bit less loft to start with, so you're encouraged to actually maintain loft, and even in some instances create a little bit more loft than is actually on the bottom of the golf club. So just because the golf club's got 52 degrees written on the bottom, doesn't mean to say that you're going to have 52 degrees at impact. You can create whatever loft you desire. So that ticks another variable, which is the choice of which club to use. Use your imagination a little bit more. Look to, like I say, create loft, maintain loft, rather than always trying to create a lower flight. Look at maybe trying to create higher flights on occasion. So these shots now on the right are being played with slightly less loft. We've got 52 degrees in our hand. But what we're going to start to do is soften up the club face, open it up when we're trying to hit higher, allow the club head to pass the hands a little bit quicker when one hits it higher, and also manoeuvre the ball around in the stance to give us the desired shot. So the ball's position relative to the centre of the arc will either give us a steeper angle of attack or a shallower angle of attack. And that's obviously dependent on the type of shot that we want to play. This particular drill, we're moving around within this spectrum of shots. We're starting off with a pretty standard shot, one that you're comfortable with. We're then going to move to the ball that's the furthest back in the stance. So this is going to be steepest angle of attack, most shaft lean, least loft at impact, hitting the ball higher up on the club face. Ball's going to come off pretty quick, not going to have a lot of spin on it. We then start to move to the one that's the most forward in the stance. This is the more difficult shot to hit because now low point issues come into play. So we'd only really want to play this when we have to, but it's nice to know that we can, and it's nice to visit that area in practice. And what we're going to see on this one is less shaft lean. Still needs a little bit more overtaking than that, but you'll start to develop that the more you use this technique. Less shaft lean, more loft on the club face, lower face contact, ball launches high, spinning quite a lot, not necessarily the most, but certainly quite a lot, and that's going to give you your highest, softest flight. As you use this exercise and started to develop this drill, you identified that you were very comfortable operating, or certainly more comfortable operating, 2 balls back or 1 ball forward of your standard golf shot. So when you pull the ball out and you get, take your normal setup, your comfortable setup, you found that you were happy or at your most comfortable operating within a certain band. So I'm just going to put this on again in a slightly lighter colour for you. So 1 ball forward of normal, 2 balls back of normal. Somewhere within this band you were quite happy operating. So, and that's fine. I mean, that's what the drill's all about, for identifying were you good, were you weak, what sort of shots we don't necessarily want to play, were we least comfortable. And what we said was that, moving the ball back a little bit to give you a little bit of a lower shot works fine, but when the ball gets too far back, things are compromised, you feel a little bit uncomfortable, and you tend not to perform too well. Fine, when you've got to play a really low shot, don't try and deal off the wedge, just take a straighter face club like a 9-iron, etc., and that's going to bring the flight down. When you've got to play a super high lob shot because you're not as comfortable moving the ball into these 2 most forward positions, then again, with it, because of limited practice time, what we want to do is have a very lofty club in your bag. You carry a 64 degree lob wedge and just play it off this 1 ball forward, and that's going to give you sufficient height to sort of deal with any scenario you're likely to find yourself in on a golf course anytime soon. So practicing moving the ball around with 1 wedge is really good for skill development. There are merits, however, to playing different shots with different clubs. Personally, I think a blend between the two methods that most people promote is a really good way to play out in the real world. I think you should practice in this manner, moving the ball around, using 1 club to create different flights to give you that skill that you need. But also, whilst doing that, start to identify your strengths and weaknesses, and then apply the idea of changing the club to give you the shot that you want in extreme cases when you're out on a golf course. So, I'm not saying either one's right or wrong. My preference is a sort of hybrid of the two. So good luck with it. I'll forward the email across. Between now and when we get together next, obviously when you're working on your wedge game, just remember that controlling the speed the ball comes off the club face is king. If we're always de-lofting the club, leaning the shaft forward, ball speed's going to increase. If we start to open up the club face, let the club pass the hands a little bit quicker, make a softer swing, if you will, because of the less lofted club at address, slightly longer shaft, then that's going to allow us to bring that ball speed down to the desired amount. So good luck with it. Like I say, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop me a line. Have a great Christmas. I look forward to meeting up with you again at the start of 2016 to start moving things forward in preparation for the season. Well done.